For the third reading today, I've chosen a reading from Father B. Griffith. He was an English Benedictine monk who spent much of his life living in ashrams in southern India, integrating Christian and Hindu spiritualities. And in 1992, the BBC made a documentary about his life, and a man called Andrew Harvey spent several weeks with him, and they became really good friends. So here's a conversation that took place towards the end of the documentary. Here's Bede speaking. You know, of course, Andrew, that we are now in the hour of God. That the whole human race has now come to the moment when everything is at stake. When a vast shift in consciousness will have to take place on a massive scale in all societies and religions for the world to survive. Unless human life becomes centered on the awareness of a transcendent reality that embraces all humanity and the whole universe, and at the same time transcends our present level of life and consciousness, there is little hope for us. Andrew asked, do you think humanity can get through? Bede answered, of course, but it will cost everything. Just as Jesus had to go through death into the new world of resurrection, so millions of us will have to go through a death to the past and to old ways of being and doing if we are going to be brought by the grace of God into the truth of a real new age. I know for certain only two things about the time we are about to enter. The first is that we will see on every level a ruthless battle between those forces that want to keep humanity enslaved to the past, and these include religious fundamentalism, nationalism, materialism, and corporate greed, and those forces that will awaken in response to a hunger for a new way of living and doing everything. The second thing I know, and I know this from my own innermost experience, is that God will shower help, grace, and protection on all those who sincerely want to change and are brave enough to risk the great adventure of transformation. Very softly, Bede added, God, I believe, wants a new world and a new humanity to be born from what is about to unfold. At the end of my conversation with B. Griffiths that morning in 1992, I asked him, do you sometimes wish you had been born in easier times? He gazed at me in genuine astonishment, and then a beautiful smile lit up his face. Good heavens, no, he said. An age like this compels you to be serious about God and change. One thing I have learned again and again is that whenever God brings you to, God will bring you through. If you love, surrender, give, risk, and open yourself enough. These are words inspired by God. For the month of September, as you remember, I've chosen to deal with the theme of free will and freedom. And so in the first homily this month, 2 weeks ago, I dealt with the physical and the psychological and the social and the spiritual aspects of free will, what it means at these levels and what the constraints and the restraints are on free will. Today, I want to go further and I want to talk about the mystical and the cosmic aspects of free will. And so when you think about free will, people's thinking tend to lie on a complete spectrum. You think about free will, at one end of the spectrum is the 2-year-old toddler throwing tantrums because he can't get his way. And so for some people, free will means that everyone is entitled to be a 2-year-old toddler throwing tantrums, that we're entitled to do whatever we want, whenever we want, and that unless we can do that, we don't have free will. The other end of that spectrum is the mystic, whose every thought, whose every word, and whose every action is dedicated to God. And so I've said to you many times that there's a huge difference between free will and freedom. Free will is the ability to do as pleases me. Freedom is the ability to do as pleases God. And so the only truly free person is actually the person who's dedicated to love, to acting in love. That's the only true freedom. Anything else is some kind of an addiction to the ego or to a substance or to a relationship. And so there's a big difference between free will and freedom. But I want to look at free will itself and understand what are the underpinnings to free will? What does free will actually mean when you're talking at a mystical and a cosmic level? So those who think that free will is simply the ability to think and to say and to do whatever I please are destined to grow up to be either the neighborhood bully, or if they're born in a kind of a royal household, to become a national tyrant. So that's where free will, misunderstood, that's where it leads. So today I want to develop a few new concepts. You've heard me speak many, many, many times about what I call the preconception contract, that before a group of souls incarnate, they agree to come in as a soul pod, and they make agreements with each other. The same group of souls appear from lifetime to lifetime, but they change their roles and their relationships. They may be born into different bodies, into different cultures, but it's the same group of souls because they've contracted before they were conceived even to come together to create the kind of drama which affords each individual person the ideal opportunity to do the kind of growing that they've come in to do. And I want to suggest today that a very important part of that preconception contract is, I'm going to call it the meta purpose of pain. When you read through St. Francis of Assisi and John of the Cross, they have this extraordinary understanding of the purpose and the beauty of pain. Pain is not just something you kind of put up with because you don't have any choice. There's a whole spirituality when it is properly understood. And so I think actually that when properly understood and when consciously harvested, personal pain can act as like a poultice that draws out the poisons from the collective human psyche. Poisons that come from the confusion of incarnation and the experience of living among competing cultures and separate selves. And so in some senses, properly understood, personal pain and even global turmoil is evidence of the planet giving birth to what I've called Homo spiritualis. The pain and the turmoil is evidence of the birth pangs of a new species of humanity. And as I said to you many times, the preconception contract, in this preconception contract, the journey of the soul has a kind of a fourfold focus. The first journey, the first importance of the journey of incarnation is to awaken myself to my true self, not to identify with my skin-encapsulated ego, or with my mind, or with my body, or with my profession, or with my relationships, but to identify with my soul self. So the first focus of the journey must be to awaken my self-understanding to my soul self, to disidentify with my role self, and to identify with my soul self. The second purpose is to try to awaken the culture of which I am a part. No matter what your job is, you can be a lowly carpenter, like another very famous one, or a fisherman, like lots of other famous ones. You can be a politician, you can be a king, you can be anybody, but your job is to awaken the culture from whatever position you find yourself in. The third function of the soul's, the third focus is to actually awaken the planet itself. You and every single one of us have volunteered to try to awaken the planet itself to Christ consciousness, to awaken us to our Buddha nature. And finally, and most grandiosely of all, is that every single soul has a focus of trying to awaken the very cosmos itself. Those billions of galaxies out there that we're just beginning to see, that you have come down in order to be a savior, in a sense, a Christ being for the very cosmos itself. And I've said to you many, many times in speaking to the notion of a preconception contract that we volunteered, and we volunteered to experience all the situations that incarnation, demands of us. And that includes a kind of a compromised free will. A free will which is not about being able to visit, my agenda on everybody else. That's not free will, really. It's a kind of a compromised version. And the compromised version is in the service of a much greater mission. And so, for instance, as we come in, all you know is, your own track history in previous incarnations. You know what you're capable of and where your weak points are. You know also the track history of all the other players with whom you're coming in. You know your mission, what you're coming down to do. And you're choosing the era and the area and the culture and the family into which you're going to be born. But once you arrive, it's improv theater. There's no plot, there's no script. You're just responding to what other players are doing, particularly those who came before you and are your parents or your culture. And you accept that part of the experience of incarnation is going to be illnesses of various kinds. And I've said many times to you that there are 6 factors to illness. There's genetic disposition, there's environmental factors, there's your personal lifestyle, there's your personal belief systems, there's karma, as you're trying to work off past issues, and there's the bodhisattva vow, where you're trying to be a benefit to all humanity. And so it becomes very, very important when you look at any illness to not focus on the etiology of the illness, the reasons for it, rather to focus on the purpose of it. Every illness has a purpose, and the purpose is always a spiritual purpose. So this apparent limitation is actually a tool to allow you to kind of bring forward your mission, your life mission. Now, the handicaps then of incarnation are actually freely chosen in order to generate the energies necessary for evolution at all levels, from a personal level to a cosmic level. So everything we regard as a handicap is actually something which has been freely chosen because it will benefit the entire cosmos itself. So that we're exercising a kind of a free will which is far, far, far greater than the ability to do as I please inside in this spacesuit. So what are some of these handicaps that we experience as human beings? 4 of them I've mentioned on many occasions before are, you've chosen to be born into this tiny little spacesuit. You, who are a cosmic being, are now trapped inside in this spacesuit of, in my case, 150 pounds. You are trapped inside, you have this tiny little laptop that you carry between your ears, this tiny little thing that's incapable of grokking the entire gestalt. And so you have to break up, the entire experience of incarnation into chronological segments, thus giving rise to the illusion of time, which doesn't actually exist. So one of the handicaps is time. The other is brain power. The other is the spacesuit. And the final one is amnesia. You have amnesia for who you are and what you've come down here to do. And then you ally to that personal handicaps, maybe like physical disabilities, or cognitive impairment, or familial kind of tendencies, or cultural issues. There's a whole bunch of other handicaps that you agree to take on. As I was thinking about this morning, I had this phrase that incarnation sometimes involves postpartum depression for the mother, but it always involves postpartum amnesia for the baby. So the very fact of being born immediately creates a postpartum amnesia for the little baby. So we forget who we are and we forget why we've come. And that's the journey of incarnation then, is to awaken to that realization and to kind of go beyond the simplistic notions of earth and heaven and the soul. And so I just want to take this phrase that Jesus used, and I want to unpack it this morning very differently. Those of us who are born into the monotheistic religions have this belief system that we only get one shot at it, one lifetime, and then there's a judgment and we get the thumbs up or we get the thumbs down. So we're going to spend eternity in heaven or eternity in hell. And very often they look at this statement of Jesus Christ, in my Father's house, there are many mansions. And people wonder, what does that mean that there are many mansions? Does it mean that's like one mansion for the Catholics and there's a different mansion for the Protestants, and the Pentecostals are in the basement because they make a lot of noise? And so are we all divided up into these artificial entities? What I think Christ means is that there are eternally evolving higher orders of love, of light, of logos, of life, and of laughter. And the many mansions in my Father's house talk about eternal progression into love, eternal evolution into light, an eternal development into logos and life and laughter. So it's not that we get there and say, oh, I made it, and now I'm going to sit down. This kind of childish notion that at the end of a lifetime, we stand in front of Peter, we get the thumbs up or the thumbs down. And if we're lucky, Peter says, okay, you're inside. Here's your seat assignment. You're going to be in G331 for all of eternity. You know, and you're going to be issued a harp or a fiddle or a mouth organ, and you're going to be given a hymn sheet. And you're going to spend the rest of your life in seat number G231, you know, fiddling or playing the mouth organ or stringing the harp. And then occasionally you get a kind of a timeout, a little kind of a break where you get a 72-inch TV screen with wraparound Dolby sound, so you can look down to hell and see the agonies of the damned. And this, believe it or not, was the actual official teaching of some of the great theologians of Christianity in the past. I see it very, very differently. I like to paraphrase the statement of Jesus where he says, there's more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 sinners who do not need repentance. I like to change that and say, there is more joy in heaven over one brave soul who chooses incarnation in a 3D dimension than over 99 timid souls who opt to stay in heaven with Daddy. And so this notion that heaven is a place, when I was preaching in Swahili, I would say to the people, Mbinguni si mahali bali ni hali. You can hear the alliteration actually even in the Swahili. Mbinguni si mahali bali ni hali. In other words, heaven is not a place, it's a state of consciousness. And it is not a static state of consciousness. It's not like you get it, and once you get it, that's it. There's an eternal evolutionary trajectory to which there is no end. You're constantly evolving into love. You're evolving into light. You're evolving into logos. You're evolving into life. You're evolving into laughter. And that for me is what the afterlife is about. When I was thinking about this homily, I was thinking about what analogy could I create or what metaphor could I use in order to kind of illustrate that free will is not something that's created on earth and is kind of illustrated by earth life, but that's something we came in before, that we created before we came here. And I thought that the best way to do it was to create an analogy of sports or games. And so I picked out just 5 sports, and I created actually a matrix of these. And for each sport, I wanted to look at the number of players, the size of the ball, the size of the goal, what restraints or obstacles were there, what protections the players were wearing, and what level of interference was allowed. So I started with golf. And typically, there's only one player. I mean, you can do pairs and mixed foursomes and stuff, but typically, golf is a solitary activity. So basically, it's one player. And it's a tiny ball. And the hole is tiny. The circumference of the hole is probably like 3 or 4 inches. And you're not, there are no restraints in the sense that, you're not wearing any kind of helmets or stuff like that. No protection. But there are restraints in the sense that, there are sand traps and there are water traps and there's high grass and there are trees in the way. So you have to play around these restraints that the environment gives you. And you're not allowed to interfere with any of the other players. You're not allowed to pick up their ball and throw it away. So you can't interfere with them. You don't need protection, but you're going to encounter a whole bunch of restraints, and there'll be rules that you have to abide by. If you move from that to soccer, with soccer, you've got 22 players on the field. It's a much bigger ball, a round ball. And the area of scoring is much, much bigger. It's a huge net that you'll get the ball into. And restraints, you're not wearing any helmets of any kind, so there's no kinds of physical restraints, and you're not wearing any kind of protection of any kind. And you're not allowed to interfere with any of the other players. But there are some rules to it. For instance, 20 of the players are not allowed to handle the ball. Only the 2 goalkeepers can handle it. You can use your head to hit it, and you can use your feet to hit it, but you can't use your hands in soccer. And moreover, you can't go offside. You can't run ahead of the ball in order to try and score a goal. And so there are rules that you sign up for, and you agree, okay, I'll agree to these rules, and I'll play according to these rules. You go from that to the NFL. And now you've got a whole bunch of players, and they're being changed constantly. And you've got a large ball, which is egg-shaped, And the goal area is not just a tiny hole or even a large net, it's the entire end zone. If you can get the ball across the end zone, you're going to score. And what kinds of protection? You're going to wear a lot of protection, helmets and paddings of various kinds. And what kind of restraints are you allowed to offer? You're allowed to physically try to restrain the opposition. So you're allowed to interfere with them quite a bit. These are the rules of NFL. And then you go to rugby. The Rugby World Cup has been played at the moment. And again, with rugby, you've got many, many players on the field. And again, you've got a large area to score. The entire end zone, if you cross it, you get a touchdown, you're scoring. Also, you know, there's no protection. Rugby players don't wear any protection whatsoever. But there's lots of ways in which you can interfere with the opposition. Lots of ways. But you still have to, you know, play according to the rules. And then if you play hurling, this ancient Irish game that goes back to 1287 BCE, you know, that I played as a young man and as a kid. And now there are 30 players on the field, you know, and the ball is about the size of a baseball. And the score area is a large net, you know, and there are lots of, you know, the only restraint you're wearing is a helmet. And there's lots of ways in which you can interfere with the opposition. So I looked then at, that for me is a great representation of what free will looks like in incarnation. So incarnation then is a game to promote personal, planetary, and cosmic evolution, in which we agree to experience the constraints and the rules of living in a 3D reality. Just like the soccer player or the golfer or the rugby player agree to the kind of restraints and the rules of the game. They're freely accepting these rules. So they're exercising free will, but it means that when they're playing the game, they're subject to restraints that they have to abide by, but they still have free will in choosing to play the game. So it does not destroy your free will. What it does is it harnesses your free will for a much higher purpose. So anybody who would say that you don't have free will in life is because they do not understand that at a much higher level of yourself, you opted to take part in a game that has certain kinds of restraints and particular kinds of constraints and rules. And you freely accept to do that, because in that way, you're harnessing your free will for the purpose of a much higher evolutionary trajectory. And this, I believe, is what, when Jesus Christ said, you must take up your cross daily and follow me into Christ consciousness. When he said, there is no greater love you can have than to lay down your life for your friends. In other words, there's no greater love than to freely accept the constraints and the limitations of incarnation for your friends and for their evolutionary trajectory. And your friends are not just members of your soul pod or even of your species, but in fact of the entire cosmos itself. So games and sports then are a great metaphor for the balance and the dance between free will and evolution, the exercise of free will in a much more superior fashion than just having the ability to do as I please when I please. So to build on that kind of metaphor, incarnation then is a sport or a game freely undertaken. And part of the free undertaking is that you accept the rules and you accept the restraints, but you're doing that with your free will. And in each subsequent incarnation, a single soul will play in a different sport or a different game. And each game will have a different set of rules and a different set of restraints, but they all involve free will on the part of the pre-incarnate soul. So no matter what incarnation you find yourself in, and you find that you're playing in a different game, you're in a different body, in a different culture, in a different role, these have all been chosen through your free will, and they've been chosen in order on the part of your pre-incarnate soul in order to advance the course of human evolution. As well as that, you come to the realization that there are radically different kinds of incarnation in different planets, in different solar systems, in different galaxies, in different universes, in different dimensions, each one of which is freely volunteered for, including the unique kinds of rules and restraints you will encounter in those different planets and those different dimensions. So not every incarnation is going to be had on planet Earth, or even in a physical planet at all. It could be in a fourth or a fifth dimensional experience. But each one of them involves some kind of a set of agreements where you accept the parameters of life on that planet, and you freely accept the restraints and the rules, and you're using your free will in order to evolve the evolution of the entire cosmos itself. Now, you can't transpose the rules and the restraints of one sport onto another. You can't go into a soccer game and transpose the rules of the NFL, and start tackling people. You're going to get sent off the field really, really quickly. So you can't transpose rules or restraints from one sport to another. So each sport is unique, and each incarnation is unique. And so are the subsequent incarnations of a single soul. Your next incarnation may be radically different from your previous one, with different kinds of restraints and a different purpose. And the same thing is true of the generic incarnations of different planets and dimensions, because the planet itself has an incarnational trajectory qua planet. And as the planet experiences different incarnations of itself, there are generic, constraints that are part of that progress. So both the individual souls and the group of souls at each level of awakening freely choose different tests and different environments and different rules and different restraints, and all chosen through free will. So in conclusion, what I would say is that it's not that we lack free will, but rather that we have forgotten our pre-incarnational plan, which as holographic fractals of source, we formulated before cosmic creation even began. And so I created a brand new term. I call it a PCCC, a pre-cosmic creation contract. So even before the cosmos itself came into being, when the cosmos was simply a thought in the mind of God, at that stage, we made a contract as well. So it's not just a preconception contract, it's a pre-creation, cosmic creation contract that we took part in as holographic fractals of source itself. And we put this into place, we formulated this before cosmic creation itself even began. So the invitation of these terrible times is to once more go trans-temporal, to go trans-spatial, to go trans-personal, and to go trans-rational. And to remember and align with that divinely inspired and freely chosen purpose of incarnation on planet Earth to give birth to Homo Spiritualis. And this for me is the meta version of free will. When you fully accept the limitations, all of the limitations of incarnation, and you're now ready to play your part in this cosmic evolutionary plan. You're just like a scuba diver who freely accepts the diving suit and the constraints of having to breathe through a tube 100 feet underwater in order to experience the wonders of the underwater world. Now, and to finish with a beautiful reading I came across recently by a professor emeritus in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies, a guy called Chris Bash, whom I regard as a modern mysticist. And here's a quotation from him. I realized that all the suffering inherent in evolution is noble beyond words. It is all a part of a cosmic plan that has been entered into freely by all the participants, however unconsciously of this fact we may have become along the way. This was the nobility of humanity's gift to the Creator. We are doing this for God, for others, and for ourselves. We can neither dictate the when nor the how of this transformation. And I would add to it myself, we are doing this work not just for the sake of the planet or even the cosmos. We're doing it not even just for the sake of future generations. We are also doing it for the sake of our own future incarnations. So be good in this present incarnation, so you'll be grateful, because you'll be grateful you did when you come back. Namaste, my brothers and sisters.